Outcome on the selective high school exam this year about to be released, I thought it would be important to advise how parents and students can cope if they did not make it into any selective high school of their choice, or alternatively, if they didn't make it into the one they really wanted to and they only made it into their second or third preference instead. I'll be going through what they may be feeling in their situation, how you can adapt accordingly, and what you should be doing next moving on in the future. Let's get into it. For the students in Year 6 who just did their selective exam in the end of March this year, a good number of students will not make it in. We know that in 2021, 15,355 applicants with 4,226 vacancies made it in, making it a 27.5% acceptance rate. We know this is acceptance rate, which is the number of vacancies divided by the number of applicants. This means that more than 70% of students who applied will not make it in, while for the 27.5% who do manage to make it into selective high school, not all of them will be able to make it into their first choice, let alone their second choice. Maybe they'll make it into their third and final choice as a backup. Regardless of whether you made it in or not, or whether you got into your ideal school or not, students would generally feel quite bad. They may experience different parts of the grieving process, wherever if they did not achieve something that they really wanted to put in. When you put a lot of hard work into something and you put a lot of focus over multiple years, that's when you might feel quite terrible or be in a state of depression. As part of the grieving process, there are 5 key stages. Number 1 being denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Going into the first stage of the grieving process being denial. This is associated with the shock of the news, where maybe both parents and the students would typically deny that this result even occurred in the first place. They know that it has happened, but it does not feel real. They may feel like, I know how smart my child is, how can they not make it in? Or my child is so much smarter or better than this other student at that school, or maybe a family member, and they made it in. What even happened? Following the denial process, typically anger will occur. Parents and students could feel angry at themselves and about the entire selection process. I am confident that the way the scores are reported will be a big focus area for the students who are not successful, because they will have less clarity and transparency of where they exactly performed in each of the exams. Remember, from this year onwards, you will get an arrow indicating where you stack up compared to other students, whether you're in the bottom percentile, middle percentile, or upper percentile. Parents and students will not get a specific score for reading, maths, thinking skills, or writing, as well as a school mark component. Parents and students might also be frustrated by the equity placement model, which was recently introduced, which effectively assists 20% of students in getting placement, meaning there are fewer number of spots available for the general public students who do not cater towards these equity placement positions. Or maybe the way that the test was pushed back to the end of March compared to the beginning of March because of the floods, with only one day before the exam, causing stress to the students. In this stage, anger will typically follow denial, and you would try to lash out to everyone else besides yourself. The next stage of bargaining is about making promises to yourself or to a higher being to make things right. They may seek reason where there is no reason, and may feel guilty about the way that they practice leading up to the exam. Could I have done extra tutoring for my son? Could I have given my daughter more practice instead of going on that holiday before the exam? Would one-on-one tutoring be better than group tutoring, or vice versa? People in this stage will feel bad about their actions and will try to blame either themselves or someone else, as they are quite frustrated about the entire situation. The second last stage is depression. After parents and students realize that bargaining will not work and they are tired of shifting the blame and responsibility to someone else, depression will kick in. Feelings of isolation, anxiety, and a feeling of dread will occur. Students may think they are not smart at all and their future is ruined. They may feel as if all the work that they've put in has been a waste of time. They may feel a bit of embarrassment when speaking and interacting with their peers, whether it's from tutoring, at school, or in family friends, especially if they were the ones who did make it in and you did not. They would give excuses and say it was tough here, or this exam was quite ridiculous. But ultimately in this stage, it is quite important to ask for help and think of your other options, because usually people in the depression stage are kind of at their lowest point, and you've got to make sure that they are given that support. The last stage of the grieving process is acceptance. Over time, you will come to this stage. Acceptance is about realizing you cannot change the circumstances and outcome, but you can gain control over how you may respond to that outcome. Instead of moping around, complaining, blaming other people, months after the result, maybe you can look ahead and accept the reality of the situation and try to improve in the other areas. Potentially, if a selective school is not an option, gifted and talented class or a private school could be a possibility. Remember that there's no right or wrong way to grieve and be upset. The process can be complicated. The time frame will also be different for each person as well. For me, in terms of the way that I grieve, especially when I put a lot of work in, but the outcome that I was looking for is not actually realized, I usually go through this cycle in just a few days, and in about a week, I will feel much better and reach that acceptance stage. I usually can get over even the toughest things in about a week's time. But like I said before, everyone grieves differently, and for me, about a week is enough for me to completely move on from a difficult topic area or something that has happened in my life. But for you guys, it might be months, or it could even be longer than that. While I know that speaking to parents who are not successful months afterwards, who are still in the depression or anger stage where they do not want to accept the situation, even though their child is at that point in year 7 or 8, they still have lingering doubts and regrets back from when they did the test in year 6. 2 to 3 years after. Just know that when your feeling is completely normal, and that the sooner you accept the situation, the better it is going to be for you to move on. For many parents and students, they've also been practicing for this exam for a few years, and not being able to achieve the goal that they wanted to achieve can be very difficult to get over. If this is the case, there are 2 ways that I would recommend to get to the acceptance stage quicker than if you just did nothing at all. This can be applied to different situations beyond just getting the selective or opportunity class results, and as ultimately the grieving process will be kicking in for any situation is relevant. The first recommendation I would have is reaching out to your support network can help accelerate the pace in which you go through the grieving process. Instead of being stuck in the depression or anger stage, you can reach out to your friends and family for that support. Speaking to a therapist could also be an option, or even a school counselor, but this is kind of on the more extreme circumstance. Secondly, what I would also recommend is trying to get your mind off the topic by getting the student to participate in extracurricular activities. Public speaking, debating, and other activities that can promote critical thinking can even assist in the future. It will help in future applications and allow you to work on important soft skills. Many of these opportunities are low in cost, where you can even do public speaking and debating at the primary school that your child currently attends. Moving on. Besides acknowledging the way you feel and knowing it is a normal way to experience what you're feeling, plus going over ways to cope with it, there are some steps you need to do after getting your selective result. If you did not make it in or made it into a lower preference school, analyze your selective results. You can speak to your tutor or just think logically about what it may mean. If you are well above average in maths, but for reading and writing, you were in the middle or below average in terms of the percentile, this is an important insight. It may indicate that your English skills across the board is not as strong compared to your mathematical reasoning ability. This could mean that students should focus more on this area if they want to be more well-rounded heading into high school. Although, if you were weak in picking skills, you don't really need to put too much emphasis or look too deeply into the result, as the reason why is because it will not be assessed again in the future. Yes, it may mean that logical thinking and time management could be skills that you may need to work on, but in terms of thinking skills as a subject, it will not be used again. There is no thinking skills subject in high school and will not be assessed in the HAST or EduTest exam, which are both exams for applicants trying to transfer into a selective high school when they're already in high school. For example, let's say that your writing score was lower than expected when you get your selective results, and that led you to not making it in. You now should think about what you did to prepare for writing instead of trying to make excuses or by going through the 5 stages of grief very slowly. If you have already achieved the acceptance stage, then you can hear this next part. So let's say for writing, before the test, you only did 1 writing task every 2 weeks and you are notoriously poor in spelling and grammar, but you spent more time on reading comprehension to really ignore it, and because you think that reading comprehension is an important subject. You did a bit of planning, but it was not as fleshed out as you would like. So by learning from this, you can see that doing a writing practice task every 2 weeks is likely too infrequent, so perhaps you can change it to once a week and see how that progresses. Instead of ignoring spelling and grammar, you should spend more time in developing a spelling workbook and incorporating that in to your weekly practice and homework setting. Instead of doing a very brief plan for your writing, you can make it a bit more structured in terms of maybe using Peel, maybe using Lock, and really try to understand the question and what is actually being asked. Conversely, if you did really well in the exam, try to understand how you did really well. What are the steps that you took to perform much better compared to the rest of the cohort in that exam for that selective test? Because obviously, if you're doing well in this test compared to the other cohort, then you should keep doing it the way that you did to keep that momentum going even in high school. In essence, first, learn from your results, then think back to what led to the result, and finally take the necessary steps to fix it accordingly. In terms of what you could do next, I mentioned it briefly earlier that joining a private school or a gifted and talented class are practical alternatives if selective school is not an option at all. Obviously, if you did not make it into a selective school, you can't beg and try to get in. You can only get in generally through merit. So you have to think of what your other alternatives are. In addition to this though, in years 7 to 10, you can still try to transfer into another selective high school. It is what I did personally when I got into Penrith High School, which was already a selective school. But then in year 10, I moved into year 11. I moved into Girraween High School, which was much higher ranked and closer to where I lived. Ultimately, the ability to transfer means that you have another chance, although I do have to state that is a lot more competitive. The reason why it is a lot more competitive than in year 6, which had an acceptance rate of 27.5%, is because there generally is only a spot available if someone leaves the school. If no one leaves the school, there generally is no spots available. If no one leaves the school or very few students are leaving the school, you might only have a few hundred students going for about 0 to 5 positions. The odds being a lot lower than in year 6, where there are guaranteed spots available because they need the entire grade or certain classes if it's a partially selective high school. Although for some high schools, there are additional spots available in certain years, like for year 9 in Sydney Boys or for year 10 for Girraween and Penrith High School, which have an additional class available, which makes the odds a little bit better. Instead of maybe 0 to 5 spots if people leave, you might get 15 to 20 or a little bit more. If you're not successful in year 6 at all, what I would do is to identify what the new goal is and then create a plan for it. This will apply for most things in life. For example, if your goal is to make it into North Sydney Boys High School, you will want to see what the requirements are for entry in years 7 to 10 and make sure that you exceed those requirements compared to any other applicants. So if they are looking for a student with a really good school report, you want to make sure that your school report is better compared to all other applicants. You want to make sure that if they are looking for extracurricular activities, you want to do more extracurricular activities than other students, as well as the quality of extracurricular activities is better than other students. If they are looking for academic achievements in terms of awards, you want to make sure you're participating in as many academic competitions as possible so you can showcase these awards as part of your application. If it's going to be a school that requires a specific test, as they will factor in a test score, such as the HAS test or the EduTest exam, you want to be prepared on the types of questions that are going to be assessed in it, because they will play a big factor in determining which students will be successful making it into the school. I want to stress again that transferring into another selective high school is always an option because you can try every single year. However, it is not easy. I personally had to try 3 times until I made it into Gureen High School, and I can assure you that I really wanted it. I learned from my mistakes every single year, and I made sure that my application was better year on year. Although, in saying that though, my test score for the HASD exam was stronger in Year 10 entry compared to my Year 11 entry. I did not make it in terms of Year 10, but I did make it in terms of Year 11 despite having a stronger Year 10 HASD score. This is ultimately because Gureen had extra spots available for Year 11 when I first applied at that time, and although I did really well in my Year 10 entry application, they only accepted 1 person in Year 10, and that person wasn't me. Besides being persistent and trying to transfer into another selective high school, you can also focus on different academic priorities such as your NAPLAN test scores. Year 7 and 9 both have the NAPLAN test, which is an exam that all students have to complete if you are attending an Australian school, and they were used as part of the transferring process. If you are still upset about the situation that you were not successful by making it in, don't mope and lose all your determination, because if you didn't make it into a selective high school in Year 6, but you're crying and you still can't get over it and you're not putting in that work in Year 7 and 8, by the time you kind of switch on that tap and that attitude, it's kind of too late, because a lot of these applications require test score and reports from your current year as well as from the previous year. So you want to make sure that your Year 7 report is as good as possible, and if you're still lingering through the grieving process, months or even years after, it's not going to be advantageous for you if you're trying to move on. In addition to that though, you want to make sure you perform well in the exam and that your school reports are as high as possible, where you want to be focusing on getting A's and B's. You want to avoid any C's or anything lower than that. Every subject is going to be important for transferring into another selective school, but I recommend putting more emphasis on English, maths, and science because it's going to be more beneficial. This is due to the fact that these are the subjects that students will most likely have to do in senior years in Year 11 and 12. Math in particular is critical as it requires knowledge from previous years. If you did not know your times tables, you literally can't do fractions. This same principle will apply for more difficult math problems, and it's a big reason why if you flunk or you do not frequently practice math questions, you will quickly find that it's very difficult for you to catch up, because it's not like you can find shortcuts as they build on prior year's knowledge. Make sure you are consistent with it as it can impact you in the future. In conclusion, students and their parents who do not get into a selective high school placement can feel dejected and go through the 5 stages of grief. Grief is different for everyone in terms of the time frame and how easy it is for them to cope through it and reach that acceptance stage. Some students may feel upset for months, while others won't really care about it at all, and they won't even go through the 5 stages of grief. By leaning on your support network and doing extracurricular activities, you can accept the situation much faster and move on with life. When students receive their test reports, they should analyze the information carefully when they receive the test outcomes. I have gone through other opportunities that are still available in the future, such as repeatedly applying to selective high schools from Year 7, so students do not have to entirely lose motivation. It's not the end of the road, it's more difficult, but if you really want it, you can prepare accordingly. Making sure students' NAPLAN scores are as high as possible and their school report and overall application is prepared accordingly are important next steps. If you are looking for someone to mentor you for the HASD exam, or you just want your fundamentals to be a little bit better, or you want some clarity in terms of what you should be doing next, if you find yourself in the situation where you either did not make it into a selective school at all and you feel terrible about it, or you're trying to look ahead and trying to transfer into a selective school, I'll be more than happy to have a chat with you. At Biggs Academy, we do one-on-one tutoring that is primarily focused on these areas and that it's dependent on the student's goals. Every student that we teach will differ in terms of their goals, and the materials that we will be providing will differ accordingly. If you like this video, definitely make sure to like it, share it with your friends, subscribe if you haven't already, and if you want to comment down below if you agree, or you want to share a comment that you want to give to someone, maybe they didn't make it in, or maybe you made it in and you want to give some other people hope, make sure to put it down in the comments below as well. Thank you guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.